Welcome to the April edition of the Bench Report. Today I will be talking a little bit about the Baroque composer, the late Baroque composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was born in the year 1685 in a small town called Eisenach in Germany. He grew up in a large musical family. He studied under the tutelage of his father and one of his older brothers. He lived a fairly long life for the time, for composers of his time, and he passed away in 1750. Bach is known for a lot about his music. He composed for almost everything under the gamut. The only thing he did not compose for was opera. He's known largely for his vocal works, well over 200 church cantatas, a handful of secular cantatas, and of course the St. John and St. Matthew Passion, and the Mass in B minor, and so many others. He's also known largely for being an organist. Here's our organ here, and I brought Bach with us. He's back from the grave. Just kidding. Anyway, that's okay. So for those of you that don't know, that's not his real hair. They wore wigs then for different purposes. I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, so with me being a keyboardist, principally a pianist, I encountered Bach in my piano studies, and of course later learned that, oh, he didn't write for the piano. He wrote for the organ and other keyboard instruments that were at his disposal at the time, those being the harpsichord or the clavichord, and some other smaller instruments that were plucked instead of hammered, like how the piano is today. The piano was not invented and used regularly until much later. So anyway, basically what I got on here for tonight is this coming Thursday, I will be live streaming a short performance of two of Bach's major keyboard works. These were not written for the organ. They were not even specified for any particular keyboard instrument. So they could have been played on whatever was available, whether that be the harpsichord or the clavichord, those two instruments that I mentioned. They could also be played on the organ as well. So I had learned these works. One of them I had learned on piano when I was in college down at PLU in Tacoma, and later relearned to play on the harpsichord. Much different technique, much lighter. Boy, I'm not sure quite how to express how different the technique is compared to the piano. The piano, it's a much heavier feel in general. The harpsichord has a much lighter feel. And the other work, the Toccata, I also learned on the harpsichord. And in the last summer, I relearned both of them on the organ here at St. Barbara's, but never did anything with them. So here I am doing something with them now. So I'm not going to play them tonight. I'm just going to talk a little bit about them, so that as you listen to them, you have a little better understanding of what's going on. Like I said, Bach was pretty prolific in his writing of keyboard works. I had mentioned in an earlier bench report that a lot of his keyboard works were written as teaching pieces. Bach's career, even though he worked mostly at churches, he was also a teacher at these churches or at the schools that were affiliated with these churches. His longest tenure was at the St. Thomas School in Leipzig, Germany. He was there for a good 25 years, something like that. But a lot of his keyboard works were written in his earlier years as well. So the toccatas, for example, they were not written as a collection. Nowadays they are published as a collection, but these were written, we think, based on the evidence available, in the early in the early 1700s, like between 1700 and 1710, within that 10-year span. And when they were published, they were published individually. Some of them were printed in one of his brother's collection. Some of them were later printed in other collections he had thrown together of various keyboard works. So on Thursday night, I'll start out with the toccata, one of the toccatas anyway, the toccata in E minor. The toccatas, the word toccata originates from the verb toccare, which means to touch. And toccatas were originally a collection of pieces for a musician to explore an instrument. So typically what you hear in a toccata, you're going to have some fairly improvisatory sounding passages. And then of course, in the works of Bach, he was a contrapuntal genius. He wrote a lot of fugues. And so you're going to see some passages like that in his works, and I'll demonstrate a little bit about how that works here shortly. And you might also get some other movements that are fairly melodic or kind of song-like. You might also hear some movements that are kind of dance-like. Bach wrote a lot of different styles of music. And the way he learned music and learned how to write music, largely he did by copying works written by other composers from either that time or before. And he studied the music of composers from all around Western Europe. So he was able to get familiar with Italian styles, the French styles, other Germanic styles, and also some English styles to an extent. Those are the four major schools that are really documented in the Baroque era. And so anyway, and there's some of this particular toccata, I would say probably focuses more on two different styles, the one being the improvisatory style and the other being the contrapuntal or fugal style, which what that does is it takes a melody and it starts out by itself, and then it takes the same melody, or sometimes modified version of it, starts it again while the other melody's already going, and there can be up to as many as 5 or 6 voices doing this at once. Even more if you're in a large setting, such as a large choral work or a large orchestral work. His keyboard settings, typically the maximum voices he portrayed in their contrapuntal work were 5 voices, which can be very, very difficult to manage with the fingers. Bach had very, very good technique, and he was pretty demanding of himself, and and his critics wrote how demanding his music was to play as well. And in fact, I'm going to read just a little snippet of a critique that's kind of interesting that I found. This is by Johann Adolf Scheibe, a critique written in the year 1737. I'm not going to read all of it, but just a snippet here. This great man would be the admiration of whole nations if he had more amenity, if he did not take away the natural element in his pieces by giving them a turgid and confused style, and if he did not darken their beauty by an excess of art. Since he judges according to his own fingers, His pieces are extremely difficult to play, for he demands that singers and instrumentalists should be able to do with their throats and instruments whatever he can play on the clavier. But this is impossible. And there's more of, he goes on, there's more kind of disparaging remarks about what he thinks about Bach's work, and I can't say that they're all very difficult. I've studied a lot of his stuff, and there is quite a bit of easy stuff in there, but in his repertoire. But there again, his students' ages range from the wee ones to the older ones. So of course there's going to be a variety. So anyway, so I want to get back to the contrapuntal style here. This toccata starts out with an improvisatory passage. So it's going to sound, I'll play just a little bit of it here for a moment. You gotta get the pedals up. Another example is in the third section, where he has a different style of improvisation. I'm having trouble pronunciating words tonight. There again, he's just listening to how the instrument sounds. So those are some examples of the improvisatory style in the toccata. That again will be the first major work Thursday night. And then, of course, Bach's hallmark are his contrapuntal styles, which I started to discuss a bit, where he takes a theme and he plays with it. So I'll play a little bit of the fugue at the end as an example. Here's the theme as it starts out. Different parts of the instrument. This particular one, he starts it out kind of high, and then his second voice, when it came in, it was even higher, and then that last voice that I just played, that one came in lower. And so he, in his contrapuntal works, he has these passages where basically the voices are pretty much independent of each other, but somehow he makes his compositions of those lines gel harmonically so that they all sound good together. And there are, how would he know how to do that? Well, there are treatises and treatises and treatises from that era and before, the Renaissance era even, of how to write in this style. I don't think there are very many in English. Most of them are in their native languages, such as German or Italian or to some degree French. And of course there are English translations of those, which some of us did study in our graduate studies while we were working on our music majors. And some of us even get to study that to an extent in our undergraduate studies as well. But so how did he learn how to write like this? Lots of study. And of course, this is a more brainy style of writing too. So it doesn't exactly sound like a nice piece of music that you would just throw on the radio and listen to. It's not like a song where, you know, a singer has, you know, some text she's singing about, and she's singing it in a style that's just an easy, simple melody for somebody to remember and later on sing in the shower by themselves or whatever. So this is a very studious type of music. So then, of course, just a sidestep here, you might ask, well, what on earth is it then that makes it so that music like this even gets performed in a concert hall? Well, of course, that's ultimately up to the performer, and it's up to us to find those high moments and those low moments to put in that level of excitement in that music, and to really kind of find our own story about what makes that music a piece of art. So that's the big example in the Toccata of some contrapuntal work. The second movement, the second section in this Toccata, is also very contrapuntal. It's a little bit more compact the way it's written, so you don't hear the individual voices by themselves at all, ever. It's more kind of like you have a melody and you have a counter melody underneath that just happens to go with it. So, for example, the beginning of the second section here, I've got to get the right stops set up. Compact form of counterpoint. So that's the Toccata. That's going to have four sections alternating between an improvisatory and counterpoint styles. The other major work, this one is a little more interesting on the artistic level, so to speak, as far as emotional accessibility, I suppose you could call it. This Capriccio, it's another multi-section work, and the title, I'm going to botch some Italian here. This title is written in Italian. Capriccio sopra la lontananza del fratello dilettissimo. Translated, that is a capriccio on the departure of a beloved brother. Now, this keyboard work supposedly was also written early on in Bach's career, his life actually. As the story goes, the documentation of this is kind of, it's not very well, but there's a story that's been going around. My piano teacher even told me this, so of course I took it as fact. But the story is that when Bach was 19, he wrote this for when one of his brothers had departed their family, had left their family to go and play an oboe in the King's Army in Sweden. And of course, the family didn't want him to go. Their friends didn't want him to go because, well, Sweden's a long ways away from Germany. And of course, travel back in that day wasn't exactly by airplane or choo-choo train or or automobile. So, you know, when you lost a family member to a job that was a long ways away, you didn't hear from them for a long time. You didn't ever get to see them, hardly ever, if at all. And of course, the best way of communicating with a departed family member or friend in the day was through the mail. He wrote letters like we used to do about 40, 50 years ago in our own culture, in addition to the telephone, of course. So this is a multi-movement piece, and every movement is written to depict a certain sentiment or idea about this brother leaving. So, for example, there's two of them. The first two are kind of more on the mellow side, and the first one is they're kind of sad about him leaving. They're trying to, let's see, the subtitle of it is, I'm reading the English, not the German. The friends gather and try to dissuade him from departing. The second one that comes right after that, this one is is kind of a short fugue. They picture the dangers which may befall him. So the atmosphere of that one is very kind of almost sinister. I'm going to play some examples here shortly. There's also an aria. It's called an aria, even though arias are typically sung. This one is not. It's played on the keyboard. But it's written in the style of an aria. And of course, it's got this great bass line that just keeps stepping down and down. It repeats itself over and over again. And the subtitle for this one is called "The Friend's Lament." So this aria is a lament. And then eventually, the friends and families, they give in, and it's time for this beloved brother to go. And so there's a short little movement that celebrates his departure. They bid him farewell, basically. And then, let's see, before I tell you what the last two movements are, I'm just going to play little segments so you can hear what they're like. So the first one that I mentioned, this one's an aria, so it's written in kind of a song style. This is the one where they're trying to dissuade him from going. You gotta get the right settings set up here. To tell him the dangers of going so far away. We have a little fugal subject it's written in minor mode, and it's very kind of sad sounding. just a segment of that. There are 4 voices in that part that I played. So if you could imagine that you've got 4 family members or friends trying to convince you not to go so far away because these horrible things might happen to you, or you might get eaten by wolves, or I'm just making stuff up at this point, just to illustrate. Or you might get killed in battle, even though you're playing your oboe, or whatever the case may be. So, and then the aria, this is where they're lamenting. Let's see here. So, gotta get the right. I switch settings a lot in these, because they all have different, I think with all the different styles and the different sentiments they're trying to portray, that as well have a variety of sounds coming off of the organ. We have them all available, so why not use them, right? So here's the lament. This is the bass line. So it's 4 bars, and it's repeated over and over and over and over again. If anybody's familiar with other laments from the Baroque period, there's a famous one by Purcell, Dito's Lament, which is from one of his operas. He's got a great bass line in his that repeats over and over and over and over again. Not very happy sounding, of course. And doing something like that by repeating something over and over and over again, it really kind of reinforces whatever sentiment the composer is trying to convey. So here's a little bit of the melody with the bass line put together. All those little sighs. Another compositional device that the Baroque composers love to use over and over and over again in their works. The Baroque period, just a sidestep here, the Baroque period is really full of drama. In their works, whether it's in the keyboard or other instrumental works, or especially the vocal works. It was also a very frilly period, so a lot of ornamentation, which you'll hear in this as well, and it's just full of drama. So, okay, now then the 4th section is where they're saying farewell to the brother. He has not been dissuaded, so they're saying, well, great, do well, have a great life, whatever. And I got that down. Okay, and so it's kind of celebratory sounding. So then the last 2 sections in this Capriccio, on the departure of the beloved brother, is pretty much mostly fugal. There's a short section. It's called the aria of the postilion. That's the postman that brings the letters. And so this is written more of kind of like a song or a tune. Definitely not something that would be sung by a singer, but definitely a song that you would play on an instrument. And some of these, the way the melody is written, not all of it is very singable. So I'll play just a segment of that. So it has a very playful feel. Typically when you get a letter from somebody you haven't seen in a while, the sentiment is you're kind of excited, you're looking forward to hearing what they're writing about. Hopefully they have something good to report. And so that's the intent of that little section right there. Then that's probably heard that is used several times, that musical idea in this section. And a variant of that is used for the final section, which is a big fugue. And this fugue is subtitled Fuga alla imitazione della posta, in English, fugue imitating the postman's horn. So the initial idea here, I'll switch my settings, is that's the issuance of the first voice of that fugue. And at the end of that, then a second issuance comes along with it while the first voice continues to noodle on, and so on and so forth. And it goes on for about, 3 or 4 minutes, something like that. So, anyway, so that's kind of a nuts and bolts of what you're getting this Thursday night. When I come in here, I'm not going to introduce them or anything. I'm just going to play, I'm just going to run the live stream like I typically do when I play. Start it, announce it, and then I'll come in and I'll start playing. So I will probably what I will do is I will tell you when I'm starting each major work. So that's it. So hope you enjoyed that. For some of you, that was probably a lot of information to digest, especially if you have absolutely zero musical training. But hopefully that will have helped you better enjoy what's coming out Thursday night. That's it. Thanks.